So I just want to welcome you all to the Health Equity webinar series. As many of you know, but for the YouTube and for other things, I'll introduce myself. I'm Lydia Isaac. I'm the Vice President for Health Equity and Policy here at the National Urban League. And this webinar series is a webinar series to really introduce the Urban League movement and our constituents and people who are interested in the work that we do to different topics that have a huge impact on health, and in particular, focusing on the social determinants of health. We are really lucky today. I'm really excited about today's webinar. It's a topic that is, I think, really important that we have not focused on as much just because, and you'll learn why we haven't. And there's a lot of competing demands, but it's a topic that really is at the forefront of what's impacting our communities, and that's climate change. And so we're here to talk today about climate change and health and how it affects BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. And we're really lucky to have Minerve and Karina Ramirez from the Citizens Climate Lobby. And they're going to start off before, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm not going to do their long bios. Most people got the flyer with their bios on it. They're very impressive women, and we're so excited to have them here. But they're going to do a brief presentation to explain to us, because I think a lot of people are not always sure about, well, how does climate change impact me? I don't live on the coast. I don't live in a city that has had issues with water. Like, what does that mean for me? And so they're going to give us a little presentation on what that means, and then we're going to have a discussion on why it's important for our communities to think through about the impact of climate change on health. So I'm going to pass it over to Minerve and Karina.
Hello, everyone. We're excited to be able to provide this presentation to you today. I am Karina Ramirez. I am coming to you from the lands of the Taino Tequesta Yaga people in Southeast Florida. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for Citizens Climate Education/Lobby. Minerve?
I'm so happy to be here and so excited. My name is Minerve Jean, and I am a Diversity and Inclusion Fellow who resides in Miami, the land of the Seminole, Taino, and Tequesta. I also go by she, her pronouns.
Okay, to get us started, we wanted to focus this conversation and presentation on climate change and how it impacts BIPOC communities. And we wanted to start with a video that sort of gives us an overview of what climate change is and what is happening.
Human activities, from pollution to overpopulation, are driving up the Earth's temperature and fundamentally changing the world around us. The main cause is a phenomenon known as the greenhouse effect. Gases in the atmosphere, such as water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, let the sun's light in, but keep some of the heat from escaping, like the glass walls of a greenhouse. The more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the more heat gets trapped, strengthening the greenhouse effect and increasing the Earth's temperature. Human activities, like the burning of fossil fuels, have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by more than a third since the Industrial Revolution. The rapid increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has warmed the planet at an alarming rate. While Earth's climate has fluctuated in the past, atmospheric carbon dioxide hasn't reached today's levels in hundreds of thousands of years. Climate change has consequences for our oceans, our weather, our food sources, and our health. Ice sheets, such as Greenland and Antarctica, are melting. The extra water that was once held in glaciers causes sea levels to rise and spills out of the oceans, flooding coastal regions. Warmer temperatures also make the weather more extreme. This means not only more intense major storms, floods, and heavy snowfall, but also longer and more frequent droughts. These changes in weather pose challenges. Growing crops becomes more difficult. The areas where plants and animals can live shift, and water supplies are diminished. In addition to creating new agricultural challenges, climate change can directly affect people's physical health. In urban areas, the warmer atmosphere creates an environment that traps and increases the amount of smog. This is because smog contains ozone particles, which increase rapidly at higher temperatures. Exposure to higher levels of smog can cause health problems such as asthma, heart disease, and lung cancer. While the rapid rate of climate change is caused by humans, humans are also the ones who can combat it. If we work to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources like solar and wind, which don't produce greenhouse gas emissions, we might still be able to prevent some of the worst effects of climate change.
So, according to the World Health Organization, one of the biggest threats facing humanity is climate change. And research shows as a whole that climate change leads to many different and devastating effects that directly impact human health and the quality of life. Side effects can be direct or indirect, as shown by this chart. So, for example, air pollution, as you can see, that can lead to either the development of asthma and cardiovascular diseases. So it doesn't matter where you live. Climate change does touch every single point of the world. While some places are more prone to air pollution, other places might be more prone to extreme heat. For example, Miami. So we are currently on a heat watch, and there are climate organizations sending out various resources to combat heat strokes. It does touch us all in some way, and it can lead to an onset of health issues, both directly and indirectly. And climate change also affects the seriousness or the frequency of health problems that people might already face. And by creating these new and anticipated health problems in people or places where they haven't previously been before, this also creates a wider array of health disparities between BIPOC communities. And so I think this is a really wonderful chart just to show the impacts of, if you don't really face air pollution where you live, well, there's something else that you might be facing that you can eventually see either directly or indirectly. Thank you. And so according to the American Public Health Association, communities of color are most likely to experience pre-existing health conditions and poorer living conditions than their white counterparts. Although there are efforts to battle climate change, not all resources are distributed equally, and we have to keep that in mind. So I will use FEMA as an example. So FEMA has a voluntary buyout program for homeowners who live in flood-prone areas. The program does aim to move people away from areas where their homes are more than likely to be destroyed by flooding. However, a recent analysis of FEMA's buyout program, however, finds that it's mostly used in wealthier neighborhoods because they have the local government resources to implement the program, meaning that they'll have that, they'll be empowered to use that buyout program, whereas poorer communities or BIPOC communities will not have access to that same resource. And again, they'll be the ones left facing the destruction of their homes. BIPOC neighborhoods are vulnerable, to extreme heat, pollution, and natural disasters, along with hazardous material. So an example I also want to point out is Cancer Alley, which is a stretch of land between Mississippi and Louisiana where there's industrial plants that produce air pollution. And so residents there, of course, BIPOC communities, and those who live there are 50 times more likely to develop cancer. So again, certain communities are more prone to a wider array of health disparities than others. And we do have to acknowledge and understand that historically racist systemic practices and housing injustice, employment bias, and healthcare disparities have all contributed to the vulnerability of BIPOC communities because they are the first to be affected in the climate movement. And I just wanted to read this quote that it's something to reflect on the nature of privilege. So the nature of a person's eco-anxiety often depends on climate change's immediacy in their life. And that immediacy often depends on privilege.
Thanks, Minerve. We wanted to pivot a bit and talk about the needed voices that are missing in the movement. So there is an organization called Green 2.0, And since 2018, they have been monitoring the composition of the different communities that are inside these environmental organizations. As you can see from this graph, the movement is still pretty much predominantly white. This is from 2022. So although they had some increase in full-time staff, meaning the individuals that actually are part of these organizations and work there, senior staff, as you can see, is a very slow growth. I can tell you at my organization, I am one of 5 Latinas, and we have about 50 so plus members. So I get to see it in my own job as well. And this is something that a lot of us that come to this work that have embraced climate change and want to work on the solutions, are becoming very much aware. And we're not the exception. There are thousands of environmental organizations out there. And yeah, the data reflects that this is where we are right now. But I can definitely tell you this, and the data also tells you that because we are the communities that are mostly affected, the Latinos and Black communities, we are the ones that are going to come to these organizations because we're alarmed and concerned. Yale does a study. They have a Yale program on climate change communication. And they do a study every couple of years to sort of test and find out how are communities feeling about climate change issues, and especially global warming. And so as you can see from this data, you're gonna find most of us alarmed. And then if you look further into the data, you're gonna find that we are the communities that are coming into these organizations to try to be like, okay, I want to help become part of the solution.
I'd like to go ahead and shift the conversation just a bit to EJ, and I'd like to start by reading a quote from Dr. Robert D. Bullard, who's the father of environmental justice. An environmental revolution is taking shape in the United States. This revolution has touched communities of color from New York to California and from Florida to Alaska, anywhere where African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Pacific Islanders, and the Native Americans live and comprise a majority of the population. Collectively, these Americans represent the fastest growing segment of the population in the United States. They are also the group most at risk from environmental problems. So I do want to give an introduction to exactly what environmental justice is, and it stands on the principle that all people and all communities have a right to equal protection and equal enforcement of environmental laws and regulations, regardless of background, socioeconomic status, race. At the end of the day, we're all human and we all deserve a quality of life, and a good quality of life at that. Now, continuing on environmental justice embraces the principle, again, that all people in communities are entitled to equal protection of our environmental laws, housing, transportation, energy, food and water security, and health laws. Environmental justice is nothing more than this whole principle. People have the right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment without regard to race, color, national origin. It's just that simple. And at the very basis of it, that is what environmental justice aims to fight for.
So what can you do? I'm going to invite you to welcome your inner warrior because we need you. Let me start a bit with sharing what we do at our organization. We, Citizen Climate Lobby / education, or education/lobby. We started in 2007. We started with 3 chapters in San Diego, California. We exist for the entire purpose of creating political will for a livable world by enabling individual breakthroughs in the exercise of personal and political power. Presently, we sit at 539 chapters all over the world. 390 of them are in the US. And we use our values that you see on our screen: focus, optimism, diversity, relationships, integrity, being nonpartisan, and personal power, as a way to help us do the work that we do. We are a 501c3 organization, which allows us to provide training, tools, and resources for volunteers. And we're also a 501c4, which helps us support our lobbying efforts. Our work is centered around the 5 levers of political will. These are the 5 things that a lot of our volunteers focus on. Not all of them do this at the same time. and some of them are experts in some of this. In addition to lobbying, we try to make connections with members of the press because it is important that we understand how all of our systems are working together. So media is essential to some of the work that we do. We do grassroots outreach to the local community. We do grassroots engagement, which we work with respective leaders and groups in different communities across this country. And we also try to strengthen all of that work by building very strong chapters. And the volunteer work in this organization is, and I'm not just saying it because I'm a member, but it is incredible to see once someone begins with us and then takes that knowledge and information to their local officials, their statewide officials, and their federal officials. We also have a weekly seminar/information session where you get to learn about what we do. So that is a weekly thing and it's free. You're welcome to join us at any point. And I also like to encourage you, if it's not us, because we understand that we can't just be everything for everybody, there's wonderful organizations doing some great work. When I started climate advocacy, I arrived at my organization and at the same time, I learned about the Climate Reality Project. Climate Reality Project is an organization that will provide you with the basis of climate change work. It would explain to you how to talk about this issue with your family members, with your neighbors, with your communities. It's like the one-on-one on climate advocacy. And they're also an international organization. They can take you in different places around the world and train you. It is absolutely an amazing organization to be a part of. For those that want to focus on voting, you can tie in your love of vote and voting rights and the environment and look at the work at the Environmental Voter Project. They actually invite people that are registered voters that don't show up on the polls and encourage them to be like, hey, you have an election locally. Have you thought about, participating in that election? And it is encouraging to see their work in different places across the country and the number that they have been able to generate, especially in the last couple of years, to get those environmental voters out there because they're registered. But the data with that organization, it used to be that they were registered, but they didn't vote. So they were trying to find out why is it that they don't show up to the polls? And they've been able to work on that community to community. There is an app called Climate Action Now. So if you feel that you want to start, you can actually download and start doing a couple of actions there. Anything from contacting your members of Congress on a federal level to anything local. They have actions that are focused on just climate advocacy. And again, a great app to learn more about. If you are interested in learning about BIPOC-led organizations, which I highly recommend because they do some amazing work as well, Intersectional Environmentalists, started by a young woman, Leah Thomas, who is inspiring a lot of young people to get into the movement. It's an incredible organization that provides training and does a bit of consulting. There's a reading that takes place through there. And it's a great way to see people of color come in and engage in this work and to be like, we own it. We're doing this. We're going to go help our communities and to see it being led by this amazing young woman. Climate Justice Alliance, if they are focused on making sure that whatever solutions we're talking about that deals with any kind of solution across the board, that it is rooted in equity and justice. And they also have chapters across the country. I would definitely recommend that you take a look into them and look at their work and see how you can be of service. What else you can do as a recommendation? I went to try to find, I'm like, okay, what are some positive things that are taking place? This is a snapshot of some positive stories that have happened just this year. So I can tell you not all of it is bad. The people that stay in the movement and decide to do the work, stay in it because we want to be able to leave the world better than we found it, right? I am a mother, so I think about what that impact will be when my child has a child. So I think about that. What would life be for the next generation? So here are some things of what I recommend that you can do. Never stop learning and asking questions. Climate change information changes daily. The more that you learn, the more that you can provide to your community, the more of a guidance that you can be for anyone around you. Check your voter registration status, please. please do so. I'm sure that you do because you're the league. Make sure it's up to date, and I encourage you to participate in your local and statewide and federal elections. At the same time, look for climate-friendly candidates. There's a lot of people that will tell us one thing and do another. It is good to know that there are public records out there where you can go check what the person does, how they vote, if they're in office right now. And for those that are interested in coming into office, have that conversation about what exactly are they wanting to do for the planet. It's very interesting to have conversations with candidates that are interested in taking on a role, to listen to what they want to do. And then if they get elected, to kind of see how they're going to put that into action. Remind you that climate change is local, so get involved. There is something happening in your city. I guarantee there's something happening in your city this week. So take a look at what's happening in your area. Look at who's in charge of the sustainability offices in your city. There are rain barrel programs and tree planting programs and cleanups if you live near the ocean. I mean, there's like so many activities that you can be involved in that you can actually see the rewards right away of participating in something that you know is going to better the community, but also make you feel good. And continue to push for people-centered policies and solutions. It is hard to have the conversation with folks that sometimes forget that, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about the humanity and trying to save that humanity. And when people are concerned about money and the economy and all of these things that a lot of people have discussions on at all levels of government, sometimes they forget, you know, everything impacts people. You know, like Minerve said, you know, I don't want to wake up and think, oh my God, my neighbor next door has a child that's suffering from asthma because they live in this area and we can't do anything about it because the price of rent is going up. Like every time we think about this work, we think about how intersectional it is and how people sometimes forget, but it is up to us, the constituents, to remind our elected officials that whatever decisions they're making it, we are electing them and they're making those decisions to better our lives. In theory, they're supposed to, but we need to make that happen as much as we can, every day that we can.
Beautifully stated, Karina. And I do want to add that please state the date for September 16th, where Citizens Climate is having our second annual inclusion conference, and it's free, virtual, volunteer and BIPOC led. And our main theme is building community beyond barriers, because, you know, at the point of it, there are a lot of barriers that we face, but if we all come together, have these conversations, we can come with a solution and continue to move forward and build these actionable steps to propel us into a better, more sustainably friendly world. And so we'll be having a wonderful array of environmental speakers, activities, and conversations where you can connect with other like-minded people and honestly see different viewpoints, because it's just as important as well. So we do invite you to please register, and we hope to see you there. And so I'd like to read this quote by Dr. Maya Angelou. "We need joy as we need air. We need love as we need water. We need each other as we need the earth we share." And again, referencing back to it being people-centric, a people-led movement where everyone is included, because everyone is important regardless of where we come from, our background. Humanity is the blood that we share.
And we want to thank you for your time. And we look forward to your questions. This is us, if you need to reach us for anything that you need at all. Wanted to share, and this is the part that we love about the work that we do. When we get together, that is what it looks like when we go to Capitol Hill. That was from 2018. We hope to recreate something similar when we go back to DC in another month. If you want to follow our work, we are on social media. We're on Twitter and Instagram under CCO_inclusion. That is the area from my department, where we share the stories of what we do. We talk about the teams that are part of our communities, and we try to get more people to come and participate. So with that, I'll pass it over to Lydia.
Well, thank you both. I think that was a wonderful overview of not only what's going on in the movement, but what the problems are. And what I love, Karina, about your slide about all climate change is local. So I want to start with that question is, what does it mean? What does climate change look like across? I mean, I know you can't talk about every community, but I love that, you know, people sometimes say all politics is local, right? And so that same idea, like, why is it important for people to understand that climate change and the impacts of climate change are very local, and getting involved at the local level is really important?
Yeah, people, and thanks for that question. I appreciate that. I think oftentimes we forget how important it is to participate in the local environment, whether that's politics, education, religion. I mean, I am in Florida, so I cannot tell you how much it's being affected right now, because I feel, and I will put that as my own point of view, I feel that a lot of us didn't do our research when we voted for the people that now represent us, right? But back to the conversation about climate. It is local because we see it every day. It is local because there is someone in our community suffering from something, and sometimes that problem is not visible. Like Cancer Alley is such a devastating example on how you could have communities live in that area for so many years, and it can go by and people are like, but why is it that people are there? Why can't people move? Why can't people move? Like, there's a lot of reasons why people aren't able to move. Like, you just need to look at the price of rent, for God's sake. Like, how feasible is it for someone to live in, to be able to leave a contaminated place to go to another one, right? So when we go and we say, yeah, it is local, we just need to look around us and be able to participate in those places. And to be able to encourage our elected officials, because believe it or not, it's like a, what's it called? It's sort of like a circle kind of way this happens. It starts local, it goes to state, and it goes to federal. You can see this in the many laws that have passed at the state level, so outside of climate, right? But when we're able to talk about solutions locally, it makes a difference and really does impact change. Like, if anyone is out there working under community gardens, I'm one of them, right? That to me is one way to help reduce the effects of climate change, because we're talking about food insecurity and helping folks understand the value of food, right? And that is something immediate, and that is something local. So I can give that one as an example.
I love it. Minerve?
Yeah, no, I beautifully stated, Karina. I do want to add that, again, the price of rent, but also those historically systemic practices where it's like redlining. You go in for mortgage, but oh, that person is from a certain community, so they might not even be able to be financially stable. Automatically having that bias that prevents that person from propelling forward out of that community, having those resources. So now think about, their livelihood, and then going forward to actually do the work. Because when members of communities are bogged down by quality of life, rent, health, like, there's so many other things that are happening that they can't focus on things that are important to fight about, how are they ever going to move forward and really fight about it? And so once they have those resources, once they're empowered, then they can be like, okay, now we can take it to what's directly affecting me, how it's directly affecting me, and I can fight against it. But we have to fight locally for what's going on, because climate change is one part of a bigger issue. It's a buildup of all of these miniature practices that have led us to where we are today. And so looking at it locally, I do think that we have to do our research. We have to know that it's important to use our voice, because our voice is heard. Sometimes it might not seem like it with all of these policies that are currently being passed, but we have that voice and we have to use it, and we have a responsibility to encourage others as well. If we're not in a place of being able to go out and do the work, we can reach out to others, to other organizations, to other people who can, use their voice for us.
Excellent. No, I appreciate that. And Minerve just really came up with a good point. And I love the part that you put about environmental justice, and Dr. Bullard, who is the, father of environmental justice. and this idea that we do need justice in the environmental movement, right? Because we've had systemic issues in this country, from, I love it, Minerve, redlining to where we locate hospitals and medical facilities to where we locate people, period. I love the FEMA example also, which is a contemporary example. A lot of people want to say, oh, that stuff happened in the civil rights movement. It's no longer happening. We're post-racial, we're post-Obama, we're post. Well, but the FEMA example is a very great example of a program that I'm going to give the government the benefit of doubt, that was instituted to help people. And the people who needed the help the most were not helped, which is a persistent problem that has happened for communities of color. So can we talk a little bit about, not why, we know why communities of color are faced with this, but how that manifests itself in the environmental justice movement, but also in the climate change movement? Why is it that communities of color, BIPOC communities, are the ones that have the biggest impact, but have the least amount of resources going to them?
Where do we start, man? It's like history 101. This is like history 101. It's like the situation that's happening in Florida with the fact that we can't even talk about our history anymore. It's going to impact the communities later on in life that will be unable to learn what happened in the past. So it's the same situation with climate change, right? There has been systems in place that have kept a lot of people out. And that is what the environmental justice part of the climate change solution is trying to address, right? You have kept us out for so long, but yet you go to these places and you attempt to have solutions supposedly on our behalf, but we're not in those rooms. And I'm like, and who are you to talk about what we need? Tell us, let us lead. Like, that's what you see a lot in EJ. EJ says, we are the focus. We are the reason that we can help our communities. We know and understand our communities better than anyone else that's going to come in there and tell us, you should attempt this or try this, right? So the more that we get empowered, and that's what EJ wants to do and tries to do on a daily basis, we can help our communities rise from all of this. And then we can have situations like, FEMA running out of funding, or being unable to tell people where they can go and seek aid. And every time that happens, I always think about people that don't speak the language. And I think about the people that are disabled and don't have access. And it's just, it adds to my desire, right, to continue to advocate for the people that sometimes may not have the time, space, or resources to be able to go and ask for the things that they need. So that's why I think EJ is so incredibly important. And I am glad that a lot of the EJ movement is led by people of color. And we want to see more of that.
I also want to add that, again, we're kept out of these spaces, we're kept out of these rooms, gatekeeping, if I want to be so candid, but also not having the resources. And by resource, I mean confidence. Sometimes it's like, okay, am I really knowledgeable to step into a room and talk about this? How am I going to empower myself or push myself forward to talk about it in a space where I have no one who looks like me? And so I think it's also about empowering our communities by having programs in place to let them know what's happening in their own communities. And of course they know, but like, what can they do about it? What is at the very basic level that is not as time consuming? Because again, there's so many other factors to worry about. What can we help them do in order to bring them into these rooms and have them sit at the table and have a voice at the table too? Because it's not enough to just sit at the table. You're there, great, but where is my voice at that table as well? So it's definitely, I think, mentally not imposter syndrome, right? Letting our BIPOC community members know you are not an imposter in anything that you do. You are just as valuable and you are just as knowledgeable as anyone else in that space, because you have that lived experience, and your lived experience is just as important. And it's also the willingness for other organizations and people to step outside their own comfort zone and to understand that one experience doesn't equal the whole, and whatever they've lived doesn't mean that everyone else has lived it either, because in order to create like a holistic solution, you need the experiences of everybody. I strongly believe in that, and that's why I appreciate EJ so much, because it does include a holistic overview of things. And I think that empathy is also one way to break out of that bubble, emotional empathy, and to understand other people's point of view.
And some would argue that your experience is actually more important than some others in that room. That's the other argument to throw out there. So I want to put on a point that both of you just touched on, and that was in the presentation, was that in the past, right, the climate change kind of face was not our faces, right? The EJ face, you're right, the environmental justice face is very much a Black, Indigenous, people of color face. But the larger environmental movement and climate change movement, and still is not represented by people of color. And the perfect example I always say, and this is nothing against her, Greta Thunberg is great. I think she's done a lot of work, but she does not get as much, but Little Miss Flint does not get as much play as Greta Thunberg. Did something very similar, had very similar backgrounds, but we all know Greta, and we don't all know, and you see, I know her, Little Miss Flint, and I should know her first name. I think it's Maya, or Mia. And so the interesting part is, why is this? And where do you think this has come from? What are the consequences of us, given that the impact of climate change impacts us so much more than it does other folks? And I want to add also for this audience, we are the Urban League. We are a national organization that is domestic, but the impact of climate change is actually worse on other countries that are not actually messing up the climate the way the United States and some of these higher income countries are. So Pakistan, we just saw all that flooding and heat deserts that are happening in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. They do not pollute the world as much as we do. The islands of the Pacific, thank you, Karina. So we're seeing, basically the flooding that's happening impacting lower resource countries that are not doing the polluting, but they're the ones that are being impacted the most. And so I want you to talk a little bit more about this issue, because I think it's an important one.
Man, it's like, talking about the impact of communities that don't even pollute and are now being affected. There's islands in the Pacific that will disappear in the next couple of years if we continue to choose not to do anything. The movement itself, again, we can go back to history. There has been an acknowledgement in the last couple of years, Sierra Club, the National Park Service, organization that started, and you can, frame it however you wish. In reality, some of this started with stolen land and stolen resources, right? That is the truth of the matter. Whether people want to admit that or not, they're going to have to go and deal with that struggle, because people facing their own history is hard for them, but that is the truth, right? So for many, many decades, a lot of us have been, like Minerve said, we have been kept away from the places where we need to be. But we are, it's kind of interesting. When you were mentioning imposter syndrome, Minerve, I was like, when I arrive at my organization that is full of people that take in science and look at their solutions based on science, I'm like, I don't know anything about the science of climate change. Why am I here? And I had to rationalize my participation in it, in thinking they don't have a voice like mine. And again, they are talking to members of Congress about solutions that impact me and communities and people like me and other people like me. But there's not enough of us in that room to be able to say, this is my story. This is how climate change is impacting me. And this is why I want you to support XYZ bills, right? And that is the thing that we are battling inside the organization, right? Because this is where representation matters. You cannot talk about climate solutions without the people that are predominantly impacted because of all the reasons that we have highlighted before. Without having us there, without asking us why this is important. So it's interesting. As I get how do I describe it? I try to reason the way that I participate in this work, on why I participate in this work, and thinking, I'm not the only voice. There are other voices, like, other voices with different like lived experiences. But I'm thinking this space would be so different if I was not in this room. So when I talk to other people about infiltrating, for lack of a better word, infiltrating these white spaces, they need you. They're not telling you that they need you, but they need you. That organization will not survive without your participation. All you have to do is look at the census and how we are becoming the bigger communities in this country. But all of the places where decisions are being made are not full of us, and that's where we need to be, because we're the ones making the future there, and those voices need to be heard and be part of it for sure.
Go ahead, Minerve.
Yeah, just going to briefly add, again, another thing is, and I don't want to get too much into it, but also the media, and how certain voices or certain places aren't as touched upon as others. And I think that there are a lot of examples that, are out there, but that is one of the bigger things that come into play. And so it makes it harder for us because we actually have to go out there and find that information. It isn't publicized, so therefore people don't really know about it. And so, I don't know the correlation of how to get the media to cover BIPOC communities in its entirety without having to silence them. But I do think one of the important things is putting a name to faces and putting pictures to places in order to get that same impact that other communities or other organizations have. Because again, being silenced, of course, no one likes that, but it makes it harder for the work to be done when it is not talked about, when it is not publicized, when it is hidden and you have to go and dig for it. There are certain things that are happening, like in Syria, that's still happening, that we don't even know about. Sudan having the war and it's not even covered. So it's predominantly white, and so they will post what's important to them, and keep us out of the conversation. And that is another form of gatekeeping. And so we do have to fight against that. And we need more people in the room to fight against that. So.
Absolutely. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get any questions that are coming through. But I have one kind of last question. I have several questions I could ask you all both, but we're running out of time. But one of the things before we get into the audience questions I would love is, what do you think are the most urgent and critical needs in the climate change kind of arena right now that our movement can think about and possibly take action on?
Go ahead.
Say this.
You can start.
Policies. Please do your research on policies, because not every policy that is a solution for climate change covers every single group under it. And it's up to us to do that research and push back on it, or say, hey, this needs to be added because it's going to affect this community or that community. Have we thought about all these communities? Have we thought about the side effects of that policy? Because sometimes policies pass, but they're not always in the benefit of every single community. Because again, we want to think about it as being a people-centric policy and not just a specific niche policy. So I'll pass it over to Karina, but policies.
I agree with you. And I will add to that, voting. Voting affects absolutely everything that we have going on. It affects every single aspect of our lives. I cannot stress that enough. But I will add also, on top of that, civic education. Understanding how this government works, this government of ours work, it is crucial to its survival. And to getting the climate solutions that we want and need, you need to be able to understand how your local government works, how your state government works, how your representative up in the Hill is making decisions on your behalf. So I would say, yes, definitely research the policies and how they're written, because sometimes they're written in a way that you think is favorable and it's not favorable. And also like really fight for voting rights wherever you can.
There's a theme that's running through our webinars, by the way, about, and I love that you all vote. I did not, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but I did not force y'all or pay y'all to say that, but that has been the theme that I've just been talking about through this, that it's true. I know sometimes it's hard because our elected officials, as I think Karina made a good point about what's going on in Florida, don't always represent our best interest, but it is important that we continue to push them and to make our voices heard with our votes, because that is one of the best and easiest ways, but most of the most powerful ways our voices can be heard, to say, and we saw it as much as there's small victories, but we saw it in the midterm elections. We saw it was just recently in Florida, the Tallahassee mayor who beat the Republican, she was a long shot Democrat who beat a long-term Republican mayor. That's a big deal, right? And that's because she went to the people and they came out and they voted. Now we have to make sure she does what she said she was going to do, which is fine. Like, we can hold our elected officials accountable, but we can't hold them accountable if they didn't see that we came out to vote and support them. Like, she has to be held accountable to her constituents now, because without them, she would not have won. And she knows that, right? And this is nothing against her. I think, I think she was a great candidate from what I've heard. I just saw it after she won, but that's an important part. Without people coming out and voting for her, there was no way that she was going to beat that Republican candidate who had been there for a while. So I think I love that you all have voting. I think that's a wonderful thing. I'm going to be a little bit more practical. Is there any local activity that you think people can do or should be if they're interested in climate change and what's happening in their communities? Particularly, I want to talk about weather events, which we haven't talked about as much, heat, tornadoes, hurricanes. I just read this article. I'm in DC, but I live in New York City. And there was a story that, like, because of climate change and this is a weird story, and the weight of buildings in Manhattan, that it's going to flood more quickly because the weight of the building is making the ground go down, and then climate change is making the sea go up. And so, these are concerns that people don't always think about. Like, they don't even always make the connections, particularly like Flint, water crisis, don't always make the connection. Mississippi had a water crisis, Jackson, don't always make the connection between water crises, rising seas, hurricanes, tornadoes, and climate change. And so, can you give some people some local kind of things they should start thinking through if they're like, oh, wait a minute, how does climate change impact, my city or my area? I'm also thinking about droughts in the West, fires. I'm just trying to think about everything that, also impacts people's health. So if you have any tips or advice about getting involved, somebody who knows nothing who wants to get involved.
So if you know nothing and want to get involved, one of the things that I would recommend right now to actually go and find out if your city has a climate action plan. So the Inflation Reduction Act, that wonderful bill that passed last fall, it provided some money for different cities across this country to do some work in order to help reduce the effect of climate change. An important thing that we should all be looking at is whether your city has a climate action plan. So go to your mayor, go to your sustainability office, ask them what that plan is. In that plan, you should be seeing things like to prevent heat islands. Heat islands are the places across this country where you have walkable spaces, but you're dying of heat because there's not a single tree in your neighborhood, right? You should be looking into that, and to better your neighborhood by adding more trees. That should be part of a climate action plan. If you live in a place near the ocean, what is your city trying to do when you get your high level waters and all of those things that happen after the hurricane? Does your city have a plan to address that? Are there systems to help vulnerable people in your communities? You should be looking into that. I would start there. There's also Moms Clean Air Force for all of us that are mothers. They have great programs. I think they started in 2021, going to the school boards to get those buses to be electric, because you want to reduce the exposure to air pollution of our children. So they started this campaign. I am sure you have a Mom Cleans Air Force near you. If you do, I will totally ask you to please get involved and help support their causes, because it's a good way to help, again, trying to keep the work local. You can see the immediate impact there.
I also want to say, for me personally, focus on your strengths too, because not everyone's a speaker, not everyone's brave enough to go out there and knock on the representative's door and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. So there are other ways to also get involved. Like I'm a writer at heart, so writing LTEs, doing op-eds, finding your strengths and focusing on that can still contribute to the movement and still contribute to solutions, because you will find people in your circle who also do that. So I think it's also important to acknowledge that just because you're not a speaker, or just because you're not someone who likes to go door to door to talk about it, doesn't mean that you can't also contribute to the importance of the solutions.
That's a wonderful point. Know your strengths. And LTE is a letter to the editors, just for the journalistic talk, the lingo. We actually have two really good questions in the chat, and so I would like to ask you all one. The first one is, when it comes to speaking with policymakers, what is most important to advocate for? What actions would be best to focus on? For example, solar power, population reduction, pollution, sorry, not population. Even though some people do say population, but pollution reduction is what the person said. What do you think is I don't know. I don't think this person's asking the low-hanging fruit, but what is it, the things that we could take quick action on now? And I think, Karina, you talked about the school board and the school buses. I think that's a great example. But are there any others?
I am personally concerned with the levels of air pollution. So, and the solutions also should be dependent on where you live. Like where I live, we're suffering from, I'm sure, the areas of contaminated water, where I see it. Also air pollution, because we farm down here, and because we're losing our oceans. So those are already three things that I can talk to my elected official about, right? And advocate for those solutions. But it's very much dependent on where you live. But my concern with air pollution is that it's something that we don't get to see. Like, it's not in our faces unless you see smog and then you realize, oh, something doesn't smell good around here, right? But the fact that those numbers go up and it continues to impact our community is one of those things that sometimes keep me up at night, because you're like, how do I get my elected official to understand that there needs to be something, that you cannot add another coal power plant to our neighborhoods? That is not the right thing to do. And then I could get totally upset and be sarcastic and be like, go add it in the rich neighborhood because they don't have one, right? But I try to find a way of like, okay, it has to be something immediate that they can do. But yeah, my concern is definitely air pollution, and I cannot stress enough with electrify everything as much as you can. And I know it comes with a cost, but electrify everything.
Minerve, do you want to answer?
Yeah, just briefly, I agree. Find out what is going on in your local community and then connect to the policymaker based on that, and find a point of connection, like a personal connection with the policymaker. Do your research. They are only human. And so we want to connect with them, on a human level. And so that's where we can start that conversation. They might be, totally opposite of your position. You might be a Democrat, they're a Republican, fine. There's still a point of connection somewhere. So do the research, find it, and advocate. So that's
a really good point, especially because most of them are local, right? So we could have gone to the same school, we could have grown up together, we could, your grandfather could have opened a coffee shop that I go to every day or something like that. And there is always a point of connection. The second one, before we end, because I know we only have a couple of minutes, is a really good one, and it's a little future thinking, which I like. Is, so are you more optimistic or pessimistic regarding artificial intelligence's impact on climate change?
I'm cautious.
Cautiously optimistic.
I'm cautious because I don't know how it will I have a feeling that some element of it will be used in the type of solutions that we're going to need in the future, right? But I also think about the equity part of it, right? Because sometimes I'm like, but who is going to have access to those resources, and how is that going to be shared with all of the community? So I think about that a lot whenever new concepts are proposed. And when I look at artificial intelligence, I'm like, it's interesting. It's fascinating that we can move in that way. But I also wondered, like, will the people that need the resources be able to get them when they need them?
Very good point. Minerve?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, especially with, I'm not going to make this long, but I do want to say, for example, with AI art and how there has been controversy based on it stealing ideas. So I'm a little worried about, there's just so many implications, the climate solutions that it might come up with. Whose was it originally? Like, there's still so much we don't know about AI and its accessibility. And I do believe that there are good aspects of AI. Like, for example, I know that it's being currently used in food agriculture to create more sustainable packaging, or I believe it's called crop mapping, where it helps farmers to plant in places where crops would grow better or create more pest-resistant crops. But at the same time, too much of a good thing is bad. So there needs to be more research done on it. So I am cautious, but still a little open to it, as long as it doesn't steal jobs. So yeah, we're there. I just wanted to add that.
I love it. I love it. Well, I think that's a good note to end with. I just want to know if either one of you want to say any final words before we close out the webinar. You were such a joy and wonderful to have you and to get your thoughts. So either one of you can start.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for having us. And it was a wonderful conversation to have. And I hope that everyone does walk away with empowerment and actionable steps, like contacting their local representative or using their strengths in the climate movement solution. So thank you.
Thank you. Karina.
And again, thanks for providing us with this opportunity. And I a final thought to remind you, your voice matters, like Minerve says. Your voice matters, and these elected officials, or wherever it is that you choose to engage in this climate situation or positions that we're in, every single voice that participates in that movement matters, and they need more of us in order to be able to continue and live, and also to remind ourselves, we are the future. So whether anybody likes it or not, we are the future, and we need to be able to participate in these spaces and come up with our own solutions. So I'll end with that.
I love that kind of final word. Thank you both so much. I want to give a reminder to folks who are on this webinar that if you are going to the National Urban League's annual conference in July, the health session will be on disaster preparedness and climate resiliency. So you see the theme that we're going with here. It is something that I personally am very interested in and think that the movement needs to think more about, which is one of the reasons why we had this introductory session to start thinking about it on a larger level. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending. Next month's webinar is going to be on Black men's health. And so we hope to see you there, and have a great day. And thank you. Bye, everybody.